All right, thank you all so much for joining in today. Really appreciate you all. So just if you think that you're in the wrong place, you're in the right place. We are here today with Decolonizing Thanksgiving. Thank you so much, Alejandro.
Thank you, Tlaxcomatli.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Annabelle Perez and I am the counselor coordinator of the Bridge program. And for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, I've had the honor of supporting the efforts of El Centro to be a program that is institutionalized at Mount SAC and that specifically supports the culture of Latinx students at the college. I would like to first acknowledge, of course, Alejandro and Fabian, who you will get to meet a little more in the next few minutes, because before El Centro was even a program, Alejandro and Fabian, I think, were the original El Centro by going around campus, setting up tables, setting up shop, and sharing knowledge about the Latino culture and the importance of understanding where you come from, understanding your roots in order for you to be successful, not only in college, but in life. And so I do want to acknowledge Fabian and Alejandro for being the original El Centro founders. And I do also want to acknowledge that the Mecha students about a year and a half ago advocated for a specific program to be designated for the support, validation of Latino students at Mount SAC. And so I also want to acknowledge the Mecha students who advocated, went to board meetings, talked to multiple people on campus to make sure that there was a support program for, again, the culture and the students that are from Latinx descent. It is my pleasure to welcome you today, like Fabian mentioned, to today's workshop. And so I'm going to go over very briefly over the agenda, kind of what to expect today. So thank you, Alejandro, for sharing some native music. We will be doing in a little while some more introductions as far as icebreakers, but I will be introducing Fabian in a minute. Alejandro will grace us with a land acknowledgement for today's event. Alejandro will also provide some spoken word. And if you've never met Alejandro before, he is an amazing poet and performer, and everything that he does with a lot of passion, so you're in for a treat. We'll have an icebreaker, of course, because we want to get to know who else is in the room with us today. And then Professor April Tellez, who is in the history department, will grace us with a presentation on decolonizing Thanksgiving. Thank you, April, for being here today. And then we also want to end with an evaluation for this program. El Centro has been around, like I mentioned, officially for about 1.5 years. And so we always try to make sure that we evaluate all of our different programs and events so that we can improve on them, and then we can continue to offer them throughout the year. All right. So it gives me great pleasure to be the one to introduce Fabian Pavon, who needs no introduction because I think everyone knows him, especially if you are from the Pomona area. You probably have seen his face in multiple spaces. And so, but I still want to go ahead and introduce Fabian. So Fabian Pavon was born and raised in the city of Pomona. He received an Associate of Arts degree in Transfer Studies in History from Mount SAC and received his bachelor's degree in Chicano Studies from University of California, Santa Barbara. He is currently a Student Support Services staff at Mount SAC's El Centro Chicanx Latinx Student Support Program. He is also a board member of the Latino Roundtable of the San Gabriel and Pomona Valley and serves as the chairperson for the Parks and Recreation Commission for the city of Pomona. He was recently recruited to contribute to the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. He is currently applying to grad school to earn a PhD in ethnic studies in order to become a professor and continue to serve his community. Fabian was a first generation or is a first generation college student. He started his educational journey here at Mount SAC. He was he worked in the Bridge program. So I do want to do a shout out to Fabian for his work as a student worker in the Bridge program. And I think he's had multiple hats at Mount SAC and has definitely contributed his knowledge and wisdom to all of these different spaces. So again, it gives me great pleasure. If we can give a hand either through your reactions or unmuting yourself to Fabian, I would really appreciate that. So welcome, Fabian.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. I appreciate that so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I will be your facilitator for this event. And so, thank you to all the participants who joined us in on Zoom. We have about 40 right now, so that's amazing. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining in. Hello to everybody that's watching us live on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you all so much for tuning in and joining us as well. We definitely have some, a lot of different folks coming in, folks from the community, folks from the students. And one thing that I really like about El Centro, when we're talking to students and how they wanted El Centro to be, they wanted to make sure that El Centro was open to the community as well. So I'm really thankful for all of the students that are here today, but also the community members that are able to join us from home as well. And so thank you so much for the introduction. Annabelle is one of my mentors at Mount SAC, and she's really been able to help shape me in the person that I am today. So thank you so much for everything. I appreciate you. And so I also, I have the honor to introduce my brother, Alejandro Juarez, and who's going to lead us in the land acknowledgement. And Alejandro Xipecoatl Juarez is a young activist and UCLA student, poet, and cultural Mexica Aztec dancer. He was raised in La Puente, California, Yangnak Tongva, and is a proud graduate from Santa Ana Continuation High School and Mount San Antonio College. Currently, he is in his last year at UCLA, where he is majoring in Chicana studies and minoring in education. And Alejandro, has been in the forefront of various movements, both at Mount Sac and out in the community. And I'm proud to call him my brother, and he is also one of my mentors. So, brother, go ahead and feel free to lead us in the Latin acknowledgement.
Thank you, brother Fabian. So first to begin, I want everyone to take a look at this map right here, right? And this is what we know as the San Gabriel Valley, right? As Los Angeles County, as even, various parts of Orange County and even San Fernando Valle, right? What you're looking at right now is basically the villages of the original people of this land. And before we start any ceremony or start any type of event, it's very important we start off with a land acknowledgement, right? And that's what I'm here today. So we at El Centro, right, and the community recognize the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrielino people as the original caretakers of this land, of the Los Angeles Basin, as well as Channel Islands, recognizing that the Tongva people are currently still here in LA, right, still in the San Gabriel community, organizing and active against different forms of erasure, as well as fighting for land, ceremony, and water rights. We acknowledge them as the original caretakers and will continue to work closely, right, and as well as support them in their efforts to have recognition and as well as for the ceremonial rights. And as a indigenous person, but from Mexico, I first have to recognize that, right? And I think all of us have that duty to do that, right? To recognize that where we are from is very important, and the histories of that land, right? What happened in that city? What happened for your city to become that city, right? What were the battles? What were the bloods, the good, the bad, and the ugly? And the first step is recognizing that that land is stolen land and it's sacred land. It's sacred land to our Tonga relatives. So, Xipecoatl to our Tonga relatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. And so just real quick, we have this tool that we came across. And I know my brother Julian showed me this tool, and it was really cool. So you can actually, find out, whose land are you on, no matter what city you are in Southern California. So I would really like to take the time to allow you all to kind of figure out what land are you on. So go ahead. We have this phone number right here. All you have to do is text your city and state to this phone number that's right here, 1-907-312-5085. And so just, this is an example right here. So like for me, I would put Pomona and then CA for California. So go ahead and do that. Type your city and your state to this phone number. And then, they're going to text you back and they're going to tell you whose land are you on. And so when they do that, please, copy and paste that onto the chat or type it into the chat. So that way we all know we're all acknowledging the land that we're on. So so this is kind of like an example right here. So Pomona equals Tongva, Quiche, and Tongva. So if you could go ahead and do that, we'll give you all a minute. And then just go ahead and drop it. Awesome. Thank you. It's coming in already. We have some folks coming in. And so those of us that are on Zoom, I appreciate you all for being on Zoom, but there are folks, that are watching us live on YouTube. So if you could, maybe, I want to call on some of you and, maybe, tell us, whose land are you on? So that way the people back at home on YouTube can hear us because they can't see the chat. So I'm gonna go ahead and call on some of your names. So if you could, unmute yourself when I call your name and tell us whose land you're on, I really appreciate it. So first off, we have Monse Naranjo. Go ahead and unmute yourself and tell the people back at home live on YouTube whose land are you on.
Hey guys, I'm from Pomona, California, and I got the message that said I'm from Quiche and Tongaland.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monse. And so we have, let's see. We have a lot of folks that are on Quiche and Tongva land, which is pretty cool. And so let's see who else we have here. So Annabelle Perez, you want to tell people your city and whose land are you on?
I'm in Covina, and I am in Quiche and Tongva land.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And Art Palacios, do you want to tell us what city you're in and whose land are you on?
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm from La Puente, and I'm on Quiche and Tongva land as well.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Kim Earhart, would you like to tell us your city and whose land are you on? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I tried to like switch between screens. Okay, I'm in Riverside, and I am on, I will not pronounce this correctly, Kailua, Quiche, and Payamakacham, or Luciño, and Tongva land.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet.
And then we have Vanessa Sawagun. I hope I said that correctly. If not, feel free to correct me. You want to go ahead and mute yourself? Tell us your city and whose land are you on? All right, we'll go ahead and come back to you. No worries. And so let's see. We have Mary McGuire. Oh, please feel free to unmute yourself and tell us whose land you're on.
Hey y'all, I'm in Glendale right now, and I'm on Chumash, Quiche, and Tongva land.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. So we're gonna go ahead and move on a little bit. So thank you all so much for acknowledging the land that you're on. And for those of you that were able to unmute yourselves, I really appreciate you. If you're still getting your text messages, please feel free to keep dropping them on the chat. That way we know, that way we keep acknowledging the land on this chat. And for those of you back at home watching us live on YouTube, I hope, you were able to hear us loud and clear of the different cities and the land that folks are on. I really appreciate that. All right. So, we're going to take this to another level.
I have a quick question real quick about that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
What were we supposed to send to the number? Because I just put what land am I in, and they still haven't text back. I forgot what was the actual message you were supposed to.
So you just have to put your city, and your state. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Fabian.
Sure, thank you. All right, so acknowledging the land is just one step in the right direction. That's the first step we can take, a very easy step that we can take. But there's also, we also have to acknowledge that there's Native folks who are currently in the struggle of maintaining the land and maintaining their culture and their history. And so here are some accounts on Instagram. If you all have an Instagram, these folks do some really great work. You actually I've actually had the chance to work with both of these organizations, and they're really great people and they do a lot of great work. So for the first one, Natives for Nature, it's led by the Tongva brother Joshua, and so he does a lot of work in the particularly in the Azusa Canyon. So for those of you you might go up to the mountains and hike and things like that in the Azusa Canyons, and sometimes there's a lot of trash. People just trash the place up, but they are sacred ceremonial sites to the Tongva. And so it's important to make sure that we keep them clean. And so he does the work to go out there and pick stuff up, but he also does a lot of different workshops that help folks kind of understand the histories and the cultures and the language of the Tongva people as well. And so that's just something right there. That's a really good organization. Another organization that they do really great work, it's called Regenerative Collective. And so they're all do all kinds of regenerative community projects where they revitalize empty lots and different communities in the San Gabriel Valley, and they do native landscaping and plant native plants. And so it really contributes to the native ecosystem and brings back different animals that are kind of being pushed to the sides by different types of development that isn't too friendly to the environment. And so they kind of reclaim the land and they regenerate it. And so these are some two organizations. Make sure you follow them on Instagram. And a lot of their activities slowed down because of COVID, but they still do a lot of different workshops and hold a lot of different virtual conversations and forums that are really important, and you can really learn a lot from those. And so we'll go ahead and move on real quick. And so again, thank you all so much for joining us. If you are a Mount SAC student, please make sure you join El Centro. We do all kinds of different events virtually, and we have a lot of things coming up. So we are doing this Decolonizing Thanksgiving event this month, and we are working on an event. We're gonna have some Tongva folks come and actually speak to our students, and so you'll hear firsthand from the Tongva about some of their histories and their experiences. So that way we can start building those relationships with the people that have been the original caretakers of this land. So that's also very important, building relationships with the Tongva folks here. And so if you want to get updates on things like that and all the different activities that we do, don't forget, make sure you follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook at Mount SAC El Centro. And if you want to join and get email reminders of the things we have going on, just feel free to text us your name, your email, and your student ID number to elcentro@mountsac.edu, and we'll go ahead and add you to our list, and you'll be up to date with everything that we have going on. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and move on to an icebreaker. We do want you all to kind of participate in some critical dialogues before we get into the main course per se. And before we get into this, you're gonna hear us use a lot of different terms. And so I do want to kind of take the time. Oh, I'm sorry about that. So before we get into the icebreaker, I'm jumping ahead of myself, everybody. We got my brother right here, Alejandro, who's gonna lead us into some spoken word, y'all. So my bad, I was jumping ahead of myself. I was super excited, but go ahead, Alejandro. I'm gonna go ahead and give you a chance to express yourself to everybody, brother. Go ahead, man.
Well, definitely. Thank you, Brother Fabian. So first and foremost, once again, much love, peace, power, prosperity, and solidarity to my Tongva relatives, to all of you as well. I'm very happy all of you are here. I want to say I see many familiar faces, but for those that I don't see, that aren't familiar, it's a blessing to be in your presence, to see you, to hear you, to see your comments, to see you're alive, right? Most importantly, this epidemic has been crazy and has affected a lot of us physically, mentally, spiritually, holistically, right? And I just want to acknowledge and I want to thank you all for being here present today, for being here and wanting to learn about, our people, your people, right? As well as, all these important things that we need to talk about, especially in this time, right? During Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving, right? What we know it is. So I also want to acknowledge, all the people that have passed away from this terrible virus, that are being sick, as well as the people that have fallen victim to this settler colonial state through, state sanctioned violence, through police brutality. I want to dedicate this time for them too, because it's been a rough, crazy year and just centuries too, right? So what I'm going to do with you today, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share a little bit of music, a little bit of song, right? Of medicine, right? What I'm sharing with you is medicine, and we call it medicine because music is a form of healing. And many of us, and all of us, right, are hurt, right? Are hurt from from many things, from genocide, from patriarchy, from capitalism, and we're hurt and we need forms to heal. And one of the ways that I've been able to heal and our community has been able to heal is through music and through ceremony, right? So thank you everyone that came earlier. When you came earlier, you heard me play some music. That was just some music that I played from my flutes. Flutes are called tlapitzalis. Can y'all say tlapitzalis? Tlapitzalis. Tlapitzalis, right? That's a clay one. Thank you. And what I'm going to share with y'all today is very sacred, very, very powerful to me, because it's what my father left me. As I mentioned, I'm now me, and my father left me these beautiful traditions, song, music, language, and these instruments. Literally, this little flute too. He left me when a man needs him. I heard it was freezing. Hopefully it's good now. I lost my father when I was 13, when a man needed him the most, but he left me all these little things. So I want all of you to start thinking, what are you going to leave your children? And with that, I'm going to begin my song. My song is called Tonantzin. And Tonantzin is a song dedicated to our Mother Earth. And this is what we, feel Mother Earth is Cuatlicue Tonantzin. And it's a song dedicated to her. It starts off in Nahuatl. And I'm going to ask you all to please help me and help me in this song, because we're all going to make this song. We're all collectively use this medicine, right, that we're giving each other to help you out. So I'm going to need you all to clap. I don't know if it froze. Can y'all still hear?
We can hear you, but you're frozen.
Kind of freezing, yeah.
Am I good now? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, you're good, bro.
Okay. Sorry about that, y'all. I'm gonna need y'all to help me out in this song, in this medicine. So I'm gonna need y'all to help me clap. Can y'all help me clap?
Like
So everybody, if y'all can, turn on your cameras or turn on your mics or whatever it may be, and I'm gonna need you to follow this beat, okay?
All right.
Ready? It's a very slow beat, and it's the beat of our heart, right? Of our heart chilling. So everybody go like this. So it's you good, you good. You're gonna follow the drum beat, okay? All right, ready? Tonantzin, 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 Paemowani yolo totatsin, Tlazocamatli Tonantzin. Paemowani yolo totatsin, Tlazocamatli Tonantzin. Tonantzin, Tonantzin, Tonantzin. Tonantzin, Tonantzin, Tonantzin. Danza azteca es mi vida, aprender sabiduría. Soy danzante, le doy las gracias a mi jefe que me dejó en cargo de su gente, que orgulloso estará cuando estará en mi clan con los otros generales y el Tata Moctezuma con Cuauhtémoc a su lado. Soy Xipecoatl, un guerrero de Aztlán. Vine a rezar y presentar al presidente porque soy un delincuente. Tonantzin, Tonantzin, Tonantzin. Tonantzin, Tonantzin, Tonantzin. Paemowani yolo totatsin, Tlazocamatli Tonantzin. Paemowani yolo totatsin, Tlazocamatli Tonantzin. My Mother Earth is very hurt. How she sees her sees in pains, like the blood inside my veins, tainted full of nasty things. Her eyes drop. Acid rain is the pollution in the air. Gunpowder, ethanol, greenhouse gases kill us all. When I take a breath of air, my lungs die slowly. Is that fair? That's all the stuff that makes me hurt. Sure, she's just a rocker bird that gives us life a night for sure. Time's wasted, never earned. I give thanks to Mother Earth. Can y'all keep playing? Or Fabian, can I have you just turn on your mic, brother? And you're gonna help me out with this? And just clap to this beat. I needed you to keep me on beat. Clap loud. Keep it going. Cause living this life is a beautiful price given by God every morning and night. So better be grateful to all of those trees that give us wonderful air to breathe. Those clothes that you're rocking were pieces of cotton. The paper we're writing were one days and trees. The ground that you're stepping, the air that you breathe, the car you are driving, the food that you eat were made by Mother Earth. So now you heard word to the nature's music and the herbs. Thank you so much, everyone. You know, that song is dedicated once again to our mother, and it's dedicated to all of you that are healing right now. Our Mother Earth is very hurt from all the, plastic, from all the pain we've done to her, especially during this pandemic. And I know it was a little off, because Zoom, this is the first time I do it through Zoom or virtually, but I hope y'all were able to feel that medicine. Y'all were able to feel that love, because I love y'all. Like, I may not know y'all, but I love y'all. And I want to let y'all know that y'all aren't in this pandemic by yourselves. I have some medicine here for y'all. Some sage. I'm burning a little bit of sage for y'all virtually. I'm praying for all of y'all. I have something to share with y'all. I just finished fighting off COVID. I think can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me now? All right. I know it's been freezing. Sorry, y'all. I said I wanted to share that I just finished fighting COVID, and it was really tough. But I want to let y'all know that, I appreciate everyone's prayers, but also while I was praying every single day, every single night, I was praying for my community, for all of you to be safe. Please, this Thanksgiving, these holidays, be careful, wear a mask, don't let your guard down. I don't want anyone to feel what I felt while I was fighting COVID. It was terrible. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And just everyone, please be careful, be safe. Los quiero mucho. I love y'all. And much love, peace, power, prosperity, and solidarity. Take care, y'all. Thank you. Thank you, Tellez Central. Much love.
Thanks, Alejandro. That was so spiritual for us. I appreciate that.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Appreciate you so much, man. I'm glad you were able to fight off COVID, bro. Big time, man. Thank you so much, bro. All right, y'all. So let's get back to it real quick. Thank you so much. Make sure y'all show some love to Alejandro on the chat real quick. Make sure you snap your fingers, do your stare, and let's get this cracking. So we're going to go ahead and get into our icebreakers. So we're going to have a little critical dialogue with each other. So it should be good, We got these questions for you right here. So if you can please, I'm gonna go ahead and put you all in some breakout rooms. And so in those groups, I want to make sure that you all take the time to go through each of these questions, do your best to answer these questions as best as you can. And so it's gonna, it should take us like around, I'll give you all about 10 minutes to talk about these questions in your groups. And so we'll, of course, what is your name? We want to make sure everybody knows each other's names. What made you interested in attending this workshop? Whose land are you on? So for those of you that were here since the beginning, you were able to find out whose land you were on. So make sure you acknowledge that within the groups as well. What do you know about the people whose land you are on? Do you have Native American ancestry? If so, are you familiar with the language and the culture? And so, we talk about Native American ancestry. Maybe some of you all don't have Native American ancestry. So that's where we can talk about, your indigenous ancestry. And so there's a difference right there. And I'll go ahead and break that down in a little bit. And so another question, what Thanksgiving history do you recall being taught in your K through 12 education? And also, give me a second. Let me unpin. I also want to know, what Native American history, culture, and language were you taught in your college courses? And we also want to know, do you think Native American history should be included throughout the curriculum? Why or why not? We also want to know, have critical conversations about the history of Thanksgiving ever came up during your Thanksgiving dinners, and how did they play out? I know I definitely had some of those. And so, like I said earlier, we are going to be using different terms. So I do want to break down some of those terms real quick. And so I'm gonna be using this book called As Long as Grass Grows. It's called As Long as Grass Grows, The Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonization to Standing Rock. And so they have a note on terminology. So there are numerous terms used to describe and define American Indian people. Some are more accurate or appropriate than others, depending on the context. Some are a matter of personal preference, while others are more legal in nature. As a general rule of thumb, the most appropriate terms are specific native nation names. For example, Lakota Diné, aka Navajo, or Anishinaabe. But when referring to American Indians collectively, the older terms, American Indians, Indians, and tribes, are terms used in federal legal parlance, and tribal nations and individuals often still use these terms. Native American is more contemporary and also used in legal contexts, but many Native people prefer simply Native in addition to their specific tribal names. Native people often also prefer the term nation to tribe, since tribe can imply cultural inferiority, while nation invokes Indians' historical pre-invasion self-determination and governing systems. I also want to mention that some of the natives throughout Latin America often, in addition to like nations and how we do here more in North America, a lot of them often refer to their communities as pueblos. And so the terms indigenous and fourth world signal originality to place and originality to place. So indigenous and fourth world, they signal originality to place and also provide context for a more global category of people who share similar struggles against states. Accounting for these complexities, we're going to be using some of these terms are going to be used interchangeably throughout this workshop. So please give me a minute. I'm going to go ahead and put you all in some breakout rooms real quick. So make sure you go and answer all of these questions.
And the questions are in the chat in case you want to refer to the chat for the 9 questions on the slide.
I have a quick question. Sorry to butt in, but would this also be posted on like in an email or somewhere where I could watch it later? Because I couldn't hear some of the things I believe Fabian was saying.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and we're actually live on YouTube, and we'll go ahead and share the link throughout our Facebook, our Instagram. If you're an El Centro student, more than likely you will get an email with that link as well. If you're not an El Centro student, you can always email us your name and your student ID number to elcentro@mountsac.edu, and we'll go ahead and send that to you. That's cool. That's cool.
My fellow Bruins, Alejandro and Javi.
Go Bruins. If y'all applying to UCLA, let us know. Or if you're thinking about it, let us know. Let Francisco or I know. We help UCLA. We help transfer students transfer. So if there's any way we can help you guys out, if any of you have applications, we could shoot.
I have a quick question for you, Francie. Javi.
DM me, message me, or Javi if
okay, right on.
All right, we're gonna get back to it, everybody. So I want to hear how those conversations went. I hope y'all had some cool little conversations, little critical conversations and reflections. So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna ask for your participation in this bigger group. And so, just real quick, I'm gonna ask you all some of those questions. So, I'll ask for volunteers, but if folks don't volunteer, I love calling people on their names. So we'll take a few minutes to kind of hear what you all had to say. So just real quick, maybe I could get somebody to kind of answer the question. What made you interested in attending this workshop? Would anybody like to share?
I would like to share.
Go ahead.
Hi. So my name is Alexis, in case nobody knew. The reason why I attended today's workshop was simply because, I am taking History 40, so I'm learning about Mexican American history, and it's really opened my eyes to, see where not only my family's culture and what, what Mexican Americans went through in the early ages. So the reason why I attended today was to get more history and to really think outside or look outside beyond the little bubble I was created in my family, because my grandparents and my great grandparents never talked about what they went through and how when they migrated from Mexico, what they went through as being new Mexican Americans or being Mexican and American at the same time. So I just really want to looked outside beyond the bubble that I was raised in. And then I was offered this today to join this workshop, and I'm very grateful for that, because I mean, I don't know if you guys are in the same bubble as me, but I don't know where I'm from. I don't know where my family's from. So getting this little bit of history is really an eye opener. So yeah, thank you, and hope you guys have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. And I'll go ahead and ask a different question. So does anybody want to share this question? So we know where a lot of you all are, like whose land you all are on. So I'm kind of curious, what do you know about the people whose land you are on? Do we have any volunteers for that one? So what do you know, even if it's just a little bit, or you could even say you don't know. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and call somebody real quick. That was a little
Hey,
tough.
Fabian. I can volunteer. My name's
Awesome.
Andrea. I don't know anything about the people's whose land I'm on, so
Awesome. Thank you so much. And
sorry.
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who don't know, and so that's important. That's important to acknowledge as well. We don't know. Why don't we know? Right? I mean, we learn about US history all the time, right? So why don't we know? So that's just an important thing.
For sure, just and most definitely everyone, like, please, like, do not feel if you do not know, like, you're any less or anything like that. Like, that's what we're all here to do, and to grow and learn. And I still don't have the answers. Fabian necessarily doesn't have the answers for how to decolonize fully. There's a lot of people that have different ideas and theories on how to do that, right? How to learn about the land you're on and fully decolonize. But one thing that I have been able to see and understand and learn from the Tom's relatives is that they're still present, that they are not in the past, just like how generally people think of indigenous people, that they're stuck in the past or we're stuck in the past. They're present, they're organized, right? They have elders that they report to. They have a system of like governance and communication that to this day they still maintain ceremony. There's a lot of ceremonies I've seen them at, specifically like at Tony Serta, in different ceremonies, different places in Azusa. And it's powerful and beautiful that to hear that speak their language. They still do maintain the language. They struggle with that, and that's all indigenous populations. Language is one of the core things to keep on, because when you lose language, you lose a lot, right? It's not just the land, it's the language, it's the medicine, it's a lot of stuff that you lose. So they're still struggling, right? Like I said in the beginning. And I think that's very important to understand. And what role do we have as people on this land to help them out, right, with that, or to advocate for different things that they need, right? So yeah, that's a little bit of what I can share.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. I really appreciate that. And all right, so we'll go ahead and
add something.
Go ahead, Kamel, go ahead.
Okay, so I in my group, I told them that I just finished taking the history of Native American with Dr. Barella. A lot of people think that that Native Americans are limited to just North America, but I found out we have some Native Americans, since we're from Michoacan, and we have Purepecha, Also, I remember something about the Tongva people. They heavily relied on the ocean, since that was primarily one of their food sources.
And good looking out. Thank you so much, Kamel. So much knowledge in this little group, right? Us presenters, we don't have all the knowledge, right? This is a student teacher, mutual relationship where we all take turns being the teachers and the students, So I really appreciate y'all sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much, Kamel and Alejandro. And I'll go ahead. I'll ask one last question. I hope somebody can volunteer for this one. So, have critical conversations about the history of Thanksgiving ever came up during your Thanksgiving dinners? How did they play out? Do we have a volunteer for that one?
I'll volunteer.
Oh, go ahead. I just want to add something real quick.
Monse, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I actually talked about it in the group right now that we had the breakouts. I don't think I've ever had my family like bring it up in conversation for like Thanksgiving or any time around it, because honestly we're just there for like, we just gather for the food and just be with family, because like it's not something we honor, something that we respect or anything. It's just something that was kind of like thrown at us. If
Yeah.
anything, it's just literally just for the food.
I feel that that's definitely typical. Was somebody else? We have like a quick minute. Was anybody else volunteering?
Yes. Sorry. I wanted to add something. So I talked in the first question. But my cousin, I totally forgot what tribe his father comes from, but I think it would be cool. Every year, my family, they go up to or to, support him. They go up to Azusa Canyons, and I think they have like a Christmas feast every year for the kids who are part of a tribe. Many, because he is a foster kid, so all the tribes get together every year and they give like their social workers or whoever's in the tribe will give the kids something for Christmas. So they have a big Christmas feast, and they talk about what tribe they're from, and many different tribes come together, and they just pretty much share the story about their land, their people, and it's really fun. It's really great. So I think that was a really cool thing that I experienced a little bit. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. So it was pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexis. I really appreciate everybody, who's willing to share, and I thank you all so much for participating in the breakout rooms, and also for participating in this larger room. Thank you all so much. And so we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is our main speaker for today. And so I have the honor and the privilege of introducing Profesora April Tellez Wagner. And so Professor Tellez is a professor of history here at Mount San Antonio College, as she teaches U.S. history. She also teaches Chicano history as well. And I had the honor and the privilege of being her student. And, when I was a student at Mount SAC, I was kind of stuck between, majors, thinking about business, thinking about, history, Chicano studies. And so when I took her class, that's when I was like, oh no, I'm a Chicano studies major. This is it for me. And so I really appreciate, the passion and the power and the knowledge that April puts into her work and educating students and really waking them up and really inspiring them to learn more about, histories of folks who have been minoritized and marginalized. And so please, everybody, give a warm welcome with your reactions, or if you want to unmute yourself and clap or snap your fingers or in the chat, please.
Hi,
Round of
Dr.
applause
Tellez.
to Profesora April Tellez Wagner, everybody.
Woo! Woo, Professor!
I've not seen him forever since we worked on the Chicano X graduation. Remember?
Yes, I remember. It's
Yes.
so good to see you.
Hard work, right?
Aw,
So we made it happen with Liz.
Yes.
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 That was amazing teamwork.
It really was. It really was.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for your great contributions. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you guys. Oh, Fabian, you guys almost made me cry, right? I'm like, no, not right now, not during my presentation, but really, truly, it means a lot. It means so much to me. So thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I miss teaching so much. It's, just really quickly, it's so busy with my 3 children that I'm not able to Zoom. I tried it last semester, and it kept kicking my students out or kicking my kids out. So I can't Zoom with students. So I just place materials, and then, I miss this interaction. So I really appreciate all of you guys being here, and especially like the students who I've never met, but I'm starting to see your faces here, right? Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening to my talk, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, so I want to begin with just, and I think the breakout rooms were really good at, setting this up, right? But what is Thanksgiving? And I know that this is now, you've already gave, your ideas, which is really, really good in the breakout rooms. But Thanksgiving, right, in terms of a historical event, Thanksgiving it happened, but it didn't happen. It's complicated, right? And so, but before I go into what actually happened in 1621, October 1621, a year after the Pilgrims arrived, I want to talk about the Americas as in an indigenous perspective and in a true fashion in history to do so, right? Because the Americas were filled with, there are various figures, population figures. Some historians and anthropologists say 75 million. A lot of them agree with 100 million being in the Americas before the invasion of Europeans. And then others argue there were 200 to 300 million, right? So although there's not a set number, we can look at and agree upon, right, anthropologists, archaeologists, historians, that at least there were 100 million people, right? And these indigenous nations were not monolithic. They were not all exactly the same. There were smaller nations, right, that lived more on a subsistence level. There were larger nations that were, complex and so prosperous that they had 1 million people in their capital city alone. So again, it's important to understand that the indigenous Americas were existent, that there were people here, right, at least 100 million people, most of which were thriving peoples, right? And you did see some civilizations for sometimes unbeknownst reasons, right? What historians think and ethnobotanists think, and also archaeologists, anthropologists think maybe due to drought, overgrazing the land. But so there were some that we don't know exactly, right? Teotihuacan, for example, why it ceased to exist. But what historians do understand is that the indigenous peoples made a formidable and a very important contribution to the history of what becomes the United States and what becomes, right, these carved out nations after the colonization process, right? So what is also important to understand is that indigenous peoples were, very, very different from Europeans. And this is very important because once we have the invasion of Europeans, beginning with the Spanish, but also including the English, definitely, right? What will develop into the 13 colonies, what becomes the United States, including, the Dutch, including the French, including, right, the Russians, right? Indigenous peoples have their own culture and their own civilization, although not monolithic and homogeneous. There are some characteristics that I want you guys to recognize that did exist across the Americas by and large. Now there's exception, important exception, right? But by and large, these are some of the truths that existed. And this will help explain, right, not only who they were, right, as a people, but also the interaction with various European powers and peoples. So indigenous peoples, as many of you are well aware of, traditionally, they did not believe, right? They had a different religion, right? And they did not believe in Jesus Christ, right? They did not believe, they did not have that organized religion, right? They're very, very spiritual peoples who believe that everything, number one, that everything was cyclical in nature, right? And also that everything possessed a spirit, including, this is critical, including the land, right? So the land possessed a spirit as well. And so they don't see land as something that you can conquer and own. You can utilize it, you can live on it, you can take from it. Most nations, not all, but most nations never took more than they needed from the land. But it was a balanced, reciprocal relationship. So that means, yes, they took from it, but they also made sure to give back, right? And so this is what we call reciprocity. It wasn't just take. And again, the land possessed a spirit. It was sacred. It was not God. A lot of students are like, oh, so they saw it as God. No, it wasn't God, right? To them, right? The Great Spirit, right? That's for other nations in Mesoamerica, right? They believe they're polytheistic, believe in a multitude of different gods. But for sake of time, right? It wasn't that the land was God, but it was sacred. It was to be respected. It was to be revered, and it was not to be owned. It can be utilized, respected, and revered, but you take, but you also give back, and you don't overtake for most indigenous nations. Another one of the most prominent features of Native American societies is their not only appreciation, but inclusion for women and children into their government system, into their whether it be democracy, a direct democracy, or even into their larger like kind of priest kingdoms is how they're referred to, that existed in Mesoamerica. Women played a very central role in most indigenous nations. They were not only respected, but they were revered, highly revered. They were considered to have what I term in class a spiritual prowess, because women possess the ability to cultivate and continue civilization, right? And something that men cannot do, right? So they had a lot of appreciation for women, right? So that's another basic tenet. going into government systems as well, right? They were not monolithic, they were not homogeneous, but just understand this. This is what I want, a major point to come across is that indigenous peoples were, some had direct democracies at the time of European invasion, right? And when you learn about history, not in my class, right, but and not in many classes, right, because we have wonderful professors in the history department who teach from a non-European perspective, or are at least inclusive of other perspectives, right? So I need to say that. But if the traditional K through 12 system, right, a lot of those teachers, they decenter the narrative. They don't center it on the Native American perspective, and also don't include truths with Native Americans. So you can understand when you learn about like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau, right? These famed like philosophers who cultivated, great ideas, definitely, undoubtedly, but that inspired the American Revolution from Great Britain. Look, at the time of European invasion, some, not all, but some Native American peoples were actually practicing democracy, right? Direct democracies, also indirect democracies. Benjamin Franklin spent time with the Iroquois Confederation and studied its actual constitution, right, before our constitution was actually drafted, right? So this is problematic, and this is going into Thanksgiving when I get there in just a moment, is that the lack of inclusion also equals a lack of representation, also equals the lack of accuracy in the historical narrative. By taking away and decentering the narrative from an Indigenous perspective, that is harmful for Indigenous peoples, not only in the past, but also in the present. And we're going to see how history, like Indigenous philosophies, is cyclical, right? And how the past is still happening today. Maybe it's not the same exact people, maybe it's not exactly the same exact thing, but the trends still continue because it is a continuum from the exploitation and the realities of history, right? Okay, so that's a little bit on Indigenous peoples, and there's a lot more that could be said, but I have to be succinct, right, for our time. All right, so that being said, now let's go actually into the arrival of, right, so it begins with the Spanish. The Spanish arrived first. And I know this is pre-Thanksgiving, so I'll be quick, right? But we have in 1492, we have the arrival of Christopher Columbus, right? And that's Taino Indian land. Those people, not all Indigenous peoples were, but those people were very, very peaceful, right? And a week after arriving, he chooses to put the Indigenous peoples, the Tainos, into a form of enslavement. Right, so already you start to see, right, and there's rape that immediately happens as well. You have the first mestizo, right, which is a half Indigenous, right, half Spaniard, who's born out of rape. It's not born out of consensual relations and sex, but it's born out of rape. Right, so you see that happening already, and this is a trend. This is called biological warfare, right, where the use of diseases, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is used to eradicate a population. Now, this is a trend, this is a reality that we're going to see consistently throughout my discussion of what happens, right? And I'm just going to open my blinds so you guys can see me a little bit better. So just give me one moment, please. I apologize. Saw how dark it was, and I don't know if you want to be able to see me. So, okay, so going back to that, right? So, you have this history of biological warfare, the use of diseases to eradicate populations, and we're going to see that continue to happen. Now, it's not just, look, sometimes, yes, people did bring over smallpox. Smallpox is the #1 killer of Indigenous peoples. Right, and it's not like somebody said, "Oh, I want to be a carrier and be asymptomatic and be a carrier of smallpox and purposely give it to Native Americans." That sometimes it was unintentional. However, right, at Fort Pitts during the American Revolution, right, the colonists handed over smallpox infested blankets purposely to Indigenous nations, right? So there was also the intentful use of diseases to eradicate populations, Indigenous populations in particular. What do we call that? That's a word that a lot of people are either A, don't like, it's too hefty of a word, or B, it resonates with only, the enemy of World War II, right, the Nazi Germany, but that is genocide, right? So what was already occurring was genocide, both physical, well, actually there's multitude of genocides, right? So there's physical, there's cultural, which in particular is also spiritual genocide, right? There's the sexual violence that Native women face that they didn't face before, right? So it's a whole new context, okay? So that's why even if we go into discussing and terming, whether, a professor or a teacher or even a person, right, who's not in the profession wants to say, oh, it was European settlement. right? They're settlers. Well, that has at least a neutral, if not a positive connotation, I would argue. But if we say they invaded, I mean, that's more what it was: stealing land, taking sex slaves, taking all the goods and supplies from various indigenous nations. Let's call it what it was, right? And I think that's really, really important to get to the crux, as Fabian mentioned earlier, to use these words, to not be afraid of the terminology, to expose, right, not only the nuances of history, but more of the accuracies of history as well. All right, so let's fast forward. So we have the Spanish invade already, and it doesn't just stay in what is now contemporarily Haiti and neighboring Dominican Republic. It spreads to Cuba, it spreads to Mesoamerica. We know, or maybe don't know, my students do, I taught them, but Cortez arrives in 1519, he plunders the Aztec Empire in 1521, right? You have Pizarro, go into Peru, right, and attack the Inca. It's all over, right? So for sake of time, right, it happens. The English do arrive later, but they also do their own detriment and commit their own forms of genocide against indigenous nations. Now, this is really, really important to understand, right? Because we have to place into context, right? Knowing all of this is the context for which we place Thanksgiving, right? So just so you can quickly understand, the first English settlers who came over, they were not Puritans, they were not pilgrims, right? So they were co-owners of the London Company, and they will co-find another company called the Virginia Company, right? So they're the upper echelon of English society, and they come over just to amass greater wealth, in particular gold, right? So this is not empty, barren land. That's a misconception. That's an outright lie, right? To say the land is empty means, oh, well, it's quote unquote free for the taking. That's not what it was. In the area of Jamestown, you had the Powhatan Confederacy, you had Doig Indians, you had a confederation. Remember, confederation means it was an indirect democracy of people, right? They had their own established forms of government. They weren't just running amok, not having any laws, rules, social organization, any form of social roles. No, in fact, quite the opposite. So when we have the arrival of the Pilgrims, right? So we'll fast forward, that's 1620. So from 1607 until 1620, we're looking at 13 years where you have, the original people coming over to make money. There were starving winters, the first, second winters of the original settlers in Jamestown. And what happens? Well, a lot of things happen, and originally, right, for the first winter, it was just men, right? It was before women came over originally, and they will start to dig up Indian burial grounds and they'll eat of the freshly deceased Indians. Now, some of these Indians are dying, rather many already are dying from smallpox, right? Because remember, they possess no antibodies. They were not, I don't want to romanticize indigenous nations nor create this misconception that they were like monolithic, like I stated previously, but Native Americans did not have exposure to the flu. They did not have yellow fever. This is pre-European invasion, right? They did not have smallpox, right? So did they get allergies? Yes. Did they get headaches? Yes. Did they break bones? Yes, absolutely. They were not immortal, people, but at the same time, they didn't have this myriad and this long list of diseases that were known and not only known in Europe and also the rest of the world, but particularly in Europe, but also did not have these massive epidemics. Now, this is the perfect time to talk about epidemics, right? The bubonic plague, roughly 50 years, you had a third of Europe perish, a third. Like, it was very, very serious. Right. And in indigenous societies, they were very, very clean. Remember, I told you most didn't take more, some did. Right, some did. The larger Mesoamerican ones, the larger South American nations took more than they needed. The Inca stockpiled gold, for example, so that's worth mentioning. But most indigenous nations, if we look at in terms of the number of nations, did not take more than they needed, and they also were very, very clean and hygienic. Right, so what does that mean? That means that these newly deceased Indians, that the original settlers, right, the settlers, the invaders, the English are going to unearth them, and they're going to eat them. Right, come the second starving winter, right? So during this time, the local confederation, Powhatan Confederacy, actually did help out these original settlers, right? And that's very, very much a tenet of traditional indigenous peoples. Gift giving is one of our major tenets, right? Giving and cultivating relationships and alliances is very much, right, a very strong history pre-invasion as well as post-invasion for indigenous societies. Right. But when they came back for the third time in a row asking for more food, and the chief Powhatan stated, I don't have any extra to give you. Well, come the middle, so they returned home to the village, the English, And then what happened? Well, Return in the Night, and some of the English ransacked the village and killed some of the Powhatan peoples. Right. And so so this is already a history. This is before the Pilgrims, right, mind you, but still it's a whole history of, we're already seeing genocide, the consequences, the vile, horrific consequences of biological warfare. Right, we see this already in existence, right? So now when the Pilgrims arrive, right, we have 1620, 1621 is what is like the token Thanksgiving, right? Where Wampanoag Indians they weren't invited, right? They ended up showing up because they heard gunshots. So they went to go investigate what was happening. And then they are invited to sit and feast with the Pilgrims. It was never referred to, however, as Thanksgiving. Now you could be thinking, well, why does it matter what we term it? Well, I mean, does it matter? Maybe it doesn't matter, or maybe it does, because what connotations are associated and what types of ideas and imagery and even falsehoods, right, are attached to the idea and the term of Thanksgiving, right? So remember, we have this history and this pattern of exploitation of indigenous peoples, of stealing their food and taking slaves. Right? So we already have this, already being practiced, right? And this is already taking place in the commonwealth in the Americas, right, by various European nations. So in 1621, again, going back to what was termed Thanksgiving, it was not called Thanksgiving by the Pilgrims. It was not called Thanksgiving by the Wampanoags, right? And what's interesting is that, yes, there was a 3-day feast. That is true. Were the Wampanoag Indians considered equals to the Pilgrims? No. They weren't, right? Definitely not. There was already a racial hierarchy that was instituted. There was a religious hierarchy that was instituted, right? A lot of times, right, it was the Pilgrims, the Puritans had a very, very horrific track record with indigenous nations. The the Catholics who came under the mission system, who created the mission system in California, the 21 missions, right, beginning in the 18th century. They had a horrible track record with indigenous nations, with committing genocide, committing not only physical genocide, but cultural genocide as well, right? So they were not considered equals. There was a religious as well as a racial component, right? So they were looked down upon, right, as lesser and inferior, right? So there was already that. So, what happens after that? Well, let's fast forward. Let's look at what the English did in 1637, right? We have the Pequot massacre, for example, where more than 600 of the Pequot are massacred. They're killed. You have the constant thievery and trampling and encroachment on Native American sovereign land. Now you could say again, well, they didn't own it. Technically true. Native peoples don't believe in land ownership. Still, this time it's starting to budge, starting to shift, right? But pre-invasion, they didn't believe in land ownership, but they did possess it. They did take from it and they did give back to it. So there's a complete disregard for them, right? The Catholic Church, it wasn't until 1555 when the Catholic Church stated, right, that, and this is more than, 55 years after the invasion, right, of the Spanish invasion. It's not until 1555 when the Catholic Church states that Native Americans are actually human beings, that they're actually people, that they actually have souls. Prior to that, were not considered people, considered to not have souls, right? It was just, so again, like in terms of terminology, calling them soulless, calling them demons, calling them, like, not even referring to them as human beings. This is a long trajectory and a very, very long history. Does it end with the Pequot massacre? Absolutely not. I wish it did, but it didn't, right? Now, is it just the English? Is it just the Pilgrims? No, absolutely not. I'm trying to get you, in a very quick lecture to understand it's many European nations who perpetrated crimes against humanity, in particular against Native peoples. Were they all exactly alike? No. The Spanish tried inclusion, right? Inclusion meant working in the mission system many times till death or until you died of disease, right? And so for the Puritans, they would force them to build praying towns and force them into these churches, right? For the English who came originally, it was just to massacre them, just to kill them off, right? For the French, there was more of a syncretic kind of relationship with the French, which means that the French actually adopted some facets, although to a much lesser extent, some facets of indigenous societies, and then likewise indigenous peoples, like including the Huron, right? Adopted, and the Ojibwe as well, adopted, elements of French culture as well. So they're not all exactly alike, but there is this repetitious pattern of land conquest of human beings, the change, the forced change in gender norms, in gender expectations, right? So Native peoples are not living in a vacuum, they're living in context, right? So what had been traditional for them is now starting to shift, not because necessarily they wanted to, but now they're facing different European powers, they're facing different realities, they're facing mass death. In fact, in the first 100 years, a lot of historians argue, there's variance, but many historians argue that in the first 100 years, 90% of the population across the Americas, we're not just looking at the United States, across the Americas, died, perished. They were decimated. The first 100 years, 90%. Now, again, some historians debate the exact figures, but many of them contend this, right? So you're looking at, if we're going to use a figure of 100 million people, 90 million people, 90 million people. And I can't just say deaths, like many of them were outright murders, right, of indigenous peoples. And a lot of it was also maybe unintentional for many, but the biological warfare, the effects of smallpox in particular, yellow fever, cholera, later pertussis, many European diseases, right, that will, attack Native peoples because they lack the antibodies. Now, it doesn't end there either, right? So let's look, now that the United States is established, what happens? Oh, the United States has a very, very bad track record, right? And if I tell you, the track record with indigenous nations, if I tell you how bad it is, I can succinctly just say Native peoples possess, we're just looking at the United States right now, all the United States, right, including Alaska, right, including Hawaii, right, indigenous Hawaiians. What do they possess today? Can anyone just maybe type what they think, like in terms of percentage? What is the land ownership of indigenous nations today when they lived, the Aleutian Islands, when the Inuit lived in what is, what became Alaska, right, called Alaska, when you had, the Hopi of Arizona, right, you had, Muskogee Indians, you had the Lenape Indians who were killed off by the Dutch, you had indigenous peoples everywhere. How much of their land do they possess today? Anyone want to just give maybe like a guess? 50%, Alexis. Okay, excellent. Anyone else? Excuse me. 10%. Excellent. Yeah, excellent. I'll just wait. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Less than 5. Yes, less than 1. You're absolutely right. Okay, so nationally, it's a little more than 1, right? It's 1.2% of their former land holdings, 1.2% federally. So all of the United States, right? Not just the contingent. We're talking about including Alaska, right? As well as Hawaii, right? So 1.2% of their land. Now, if we look at California as a state, we are more progressive, right? More progressive. Wow, this is 0.4%, right? But it is 1.6% of California is still inhabited and belongs to, right, indigenous nations. So it is higher than the national average, but still, look at that. This is the history. This is the reality of conquest. And by discussing Thanksgiving, right, should we call Thanksgiving or should we call Thanks-taking? Well, we see this conquest, we see the lack of regard of Native human life. We see the outright sexual violence, rape, right? We see the pillaging of Native peoples. Let's continue on, right? It goes even further, because what's important to understand is that genocide is not only physical, right? Genocide by the Geneva Accords and Conventions, right, actually was coined, go back to post-World War II, right? Ralph Lemkin is his name, and he coined the term during the Nuremberg trials, right, which were the trials of Nazi war criminals. And genocide is defined as the systematic attempt to annihilate a national, racial, religious, or ethnic group, culturally, physically, or both ways. So in the inherent definition of genocide is not only attempting to, you don't even have to be successful in, but when a government system attempts to and or is successful in eliminating not only people, but people's culture, that is indicative of, and they are guilty of what? Genocide. So a lot more people are, I don't know if it's well aware, but more aware of the systematic takeover of land, the dispossession of land, of the outright physical genocide. I don't know if you were familiar with what I stated previously, which was the purposely handing over smallpox infested blankets or not, if you're aware of that, but that did happen as well. It wasn't, unfortunately, wasn't an isolated occurrence, right? But less people, I would argue, in US society are aware of the effects of cultural genocide, right? And let's talk about that. There was a policy, right, it started really in the 1830s, but became more exponential and more ingrained, right? In the latter, like the 1870s, 1890s, right? In 1901 was when Sherman Institute was created in Riverside. So, into the early 20th century as well. the US government started a policy under this mantra, if you will, of the motto was kill the Indian, save the man. So it wasn't enough for them to just dispossess them of the land, to hand over smallpox infested blankets, and or if they didn't do that in particular, then to discredit them, to deny them sovereignty, to sign treaties. 371 treaties have been signed between various indigenous nations and the United States. Not one has been kept in totality on behalf of the US government. Not one. That is a horrible, horrible track record. Why would anyone believe a system, let alone if we want to personify a person, if they lied to them 371 times, right? So this is very, very telling. But now let's continue on with the kill the Indian, save the man. It was supposed to be this progressive motto. And so it was, let's not kill the man any longer. We've been doing that enough, right? So let's now just kill off their culture, right? Let's force them out of their spirituality. They can no longer do their prayers or their bird chants or their drumming. They no longer can have kachina dolls, right? They no longer can possess those. They no longer can, pray to whoever they want, the Great Spirit, for example. No, they can't do that. In addition to that, these boarding schools, they would force them to lose their native tongue. So languages were not just lost. When we say languages were lost, I mean, yes, they were lost, but they were forcibly lost, right? So people didn't just lose them like I lose my keys all the time. No, it wasn't that, right? What happened was they were, the US government forbade Native peoples from speaking their indigenous tongue, right? So they were trying to change everything about indigenous peoples, but say, hey, we're better, we're progressive because we actually let the physical person exist, right? And I find that very, very problematic. I've had, I miss teaching in person. I've already stated that, but in class we've had wonderful discussions on this, right, before COVID, and some students argued, well, Professor Tellez, right, at least it's better, that they didn't kill them. I don't know. I mean, one could easily argue too, right? Maybe that's a slow, torturous death. I mean, imagine if I asked all of you to write a list of, the top 10 things that makes you you. I'm sure number one would be like your name, right? Or the top 10 things that make you, declare your identity, right? I have my students do this in class, right? Put your name, a lot of people put their religion, and then I tell them cross out everything that has, that Native Americans were forced to get rid of, including their names. They were forced to change their names. They wouldn't be called on, they wouldn't be fed. There were massive punishments. They were whipped. They died in Riverside, it was cholera, but many different diseases, right? So indigenous peoples died of these diseases. So again, going back to this idea of Thanksgiving, right? It creates a falsehood, it creates a fallacy of, wow, the English tried, the Pilgrims in particular, they tried to have an equal relationship. They were inviting, they were kind. I'm not going to argue it's all or nothing. Like, history is complicated. I always tell my students there's areas shaded gray. Absolutely, there are good people in history. I'm not going to deny that. There are people who went against the grain. I love those people. They're called dissenters. I'm sure many of you are dissenters here. Thank you for being a dissenter, for thinking outside the box. So I don't want to paint this like completely negative picture, but ultimately, was that the systematic reality? It was, right? To either eradicate Native peoples, to belittle them, to encroach on their land, to put them into inferior positions, to not recognize their independence, which is called their sovereignty, as Native nations, which is what they were, and also to rid them of their culture, right? And to force them to be somebody that they weren't. So all this is happening. So when we get back to the idea of Thanksgiving, that creates these falsehoods that there was an egalitarian or at least like a semi-alliance or respectability that existed, right? For, in particular, on behalf of European peoples with Native peoples. The history is very, very different. It's very, very different to that. If we fast forward very quickly, to 1890. I mean, please check this out, right? I didn't want to use a PowerPoint because I miss teaching, so I just wanted to do, and I never use PowerPoint. If you've had me as a student, I didn't use PowerPoint, but I was inclined to do this. I'll just tell you what to watch, right? Look up the 1890 Massacre at Wounded Knee. There are great films, like there's a history little segment on YouTube, but other good ones, A&E has one as well, but look it up. Now we fast forward to December 28th of 1890. There's a massacre of over 300, primarily, not exclusively, but women and children and elders who are killed, right? And yes, there's particulars, right? Somebody was, one of the Native gentlemen, the Lakota, was deaf. He didn't hand over his gun as demanded. But ultimately what it was the U.S. government, the U.S. cavalry they were fearful of indigenous peoples practicing the ghost dance, which was a peaceful, mind you, cultural revitalization dance. And so they were so scared. Look, this is important to understand. When we retain our culture, that is power. Look, resistance does not have to come just in the physical manner, right? Putting up, our fists, right? And that did happen. There were indigenous peoples who fought like physically back against the encroachment and the genocide. My daughter is actually named after one of such women, and her name is Lozen, right? Lozen, right? So my daughter exemplifies a lot of those traits, right? And most days I love it. Sometimes I'm like, okay, Lozen, I'm not the enemy. But right, she's amazing. She's a very, very strong young lady. And I love that. And I appreciate her so much. But there's also the cultural revitalization. Cultural resistance is something that we can practice every single day. And look, to go back to Fabian, Alejandro, right, and the land acknowledgement and the discussions, this is very, very important to consider. If you know who you are and where you come from, you are darn sure more empowered than if you don't, right? And you don't have to fall victim to misconceptions or lies, or you don't have to try to create an identity for yourself that is maybe based on something more, whether it's facetious or something that does not, like brands or wearing certain brands, doing those things, you know who you are. That is a strength, that is a resolve, and that is power, right? So going back to the beginning of this talk, right, that's what we need to understand, is that embodies a empowerment, right? And so you guys possess that, and I'm proud of that. So these 300 women and children, elderly men, gentlemen as well, they were buried in mass graves. It took, not really buried, thrown into, rather, is probably the more appropriate term, but they were thrown into these mass graves, right? It took 2 days for the U.S. cavalry to throw them into mass graves. If you please go research that or look up the little video, you're going to see so many parallels between what happened, right? What was committed by the U.S. cavalry against the Lakota and also other indigenous nations, but primarily Lakota. There are a couple of individuals who were there who are not Lakota. And also compare that to what happened in terms of, Nazi war camps and the Holocaust and killing off the Jews and then throwing them into these massive ditches, right? And there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of parallels, right? And so something that I asked you guys to consider. If we fast forward to, indigenous nations today, right? There's a lot I'm leaving out because I'm looking at the time and I know our time is almost up. But in the 1930s, there was a termination program. It was 1932, the Indian New Deal, right? And so what happened with the Indian New Deal is it terminated the relationship. Interestingly enough, it was during the Great Depression. So all of a sudden, the U.S. government's going to say, oh, hey, you know what? You want to be independent? Cool, go be independent. Now, I know I'm being short with that. There's a lot more complexities with it, but I don't have the time. But ultimately, that's what it meant. So it's like, okay, now that the U.S. government had created a dependency relationship, the United States government's going to be like, well, sorry, sucks to be you, basically in lump sum, and leave indigenous peoples who are already more poverty-stricken than the most poverty-stricken in major societies, right? In even not only major societies, but in many rural areas, right? And so this still continues to exist. If we fast forward, even post American Indian movement that began in the late 1960s, part of the civil rights era and movement, which was phenomenal, demonstration of power and return to indigenous ways and cultural revitalization, very, very beautiful. And if you could take a class with me, then we'll cover that. That would be awesome. But even today, I want to end here because remember, history is a cycle, right? So even today, what we see today is that we have 10% of, well, it's a little less, it's like 8.9%, but almost 10% of the US population, indigenous population, that does not have indoor electricity and indoor plumbing. Almost 10% of the population does not have indoor plumbing or electricity. That is bad. That is horrible. Now, let's talk about the pandemic as well, because look, we cannot isolate it. There's a pandemic, everyone is isolated, right? But at least we have our families. Can you imagine now that we can experience, or we've experienced that, and it's horrific, I'm not denying that. Can you imagine a child forcibly removed from his or her parents and taken to a boarding school and not being able to see them for 10, 12, 15, 16 years. And then when they return, they can't connect to the culture as much because they can't speak the tongue, because they have different ways of life. They question their family, about their beliefs, right? And so all that is happening, right? And so today, okay, we have that. We have lack of clean water access, lack of clean water access. We talk about Flint, which we should talk about Flint. I'm not denying that. But in addition to, to Flint, Michigan, we also have in Arizona, the Navajo don't have access to clean drinking water, right? We have many indigenous nations who do not have access to clean drinking water. The Dakota Access Pipeline, well, they're drinking dirty water because the Dakota Access Pipeline as well. Like, this is in the here and now. Look, history is a what, you guys? I know it's hard to see me. I apologize. I sat in the wrong room. I'm sorry, right? But I don't want to take my time to get up and put the lights on. But that being said, right, it's history is cyclical, right? So that's something to consider, right? History is cyclical and it's still happening today. The highest rates of suicide in all of the United States, you guys, where is it at? It's on Indian reservations, right? Babe, can you turn on my light, please, right there? It's so dark right here. Thank you. All right. So it's on Indian reservations, the highest suicide rates, the highest homicide rates. There are more than 1,000 and 1,500 disappeared women, missing and murdered indigenous women in the United States alone. It's a lot larger if we look across the Americas, but more than 1,500 in the United States alone, missing and murdered indigenous women. These are plights that happen today that are deeply rooted and connected to the history of this exploitation and this colonization. Thus, should we really be calling it Thanksgiving? Look, the question was asked prior, have you ever told your family? My students, my former students especially, know, yes. When I first found out the truth about Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving, I revealed it to my family at Thanksgiving dinner, and everyone was just sitting there with their food like this. I'm not saying that you have to do that, right? To each her own, teach their own, teach his own, right? Respect what you want to do. I am just saying that, look, knowledge is power. We need to know what is happening. A lot of people don't recognize that the plight of indigenous peoples is absolutely connected. You should celebrate with your family. You should be thankful daily. I know during times like this, it's hard, right? To be thankful, right? Because we're stuck and we can't express ourselves in the way we would, have that movement, that ability. I recognize all that. But at the same time, right, we also need to be illuminated and to also understand, right, the true history behind what happened. Was there an equal platform of relationships with the English, with the United States government? Absolutely not. It was a history, a formidable history it was a sad, horrible history of genocide against Native peoples, but it was also a history of Native peoples resisting in various ways, physically, culturally, spiritually. And the fact that we have land acknowledgement, the fact that we have students, right, who organize this event, or alum who organize this event, right, the fact that we have people who care and are making these definite changes, even if they're incremental and small, it's going to amass greater changes. And so it's really, really critical for each and every one of you here to become knowledgeable about where you come from, who you are, what happened in the past, and do anything that you can to give back to your community. Thank you for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much, Professora Tellez. Everybody, please make sure we show some love on the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and show some love. Feel free to react. I encourage you to unmute yourself so that way the folks on YouTube, live on YouTube, can hear you all and your reactions and your bravos and your snaps. Thank you so much, Professora.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's always a pleasure to be able to hear you and listen to you, because you're so inspiring.
Oh, I love you. Thank you, Monse. Thank you, all of you guys. I really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, so we can go ahead and open it up for questions. Before you all leave, though, please make sure you complete the survey. So I'll just go ahead and put it on right there. But please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them on the chat. We'll have a few minutes for that. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Oh, sorry. Let me go.
I'll go after you.
So I don't know if you touched over it in the class, but can you explain why the Americans were so prioritized and not the Native Americans? So when we are learning about the history of the Native American people and how their land was taken from them, why do we only learn about the Americans and how they pretty much settled here and how they build, the industry, and not the Native Americans?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So they did build things, right? So I think that's one of the misconceptions. I don't know if you're referring to industry as like a industrial revolution type of industry, right? But you had, right, or there was existent, right, many, they had cities. They had, for example, let's look at Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec, right? So it was the largest city when Cortez arrived. It was the largest, and not only the largest, let me also add in the cleanest city, right? And I'm not arguing that it didn't have its social strata or social inequities. I'm not romanticizing, right? There are some things, right, that they utilize forms of slavery, which I honestly don't agree with, right? But that it is what it is. That was history. But they had the cleanest city. They had temples. They had massive buildings. They had gold-adorned libraries. They had aviaries. They had zoos, right? They had medicinal. When people got sick, they had like hospital areas that were carved out. So that's a misconception that indigenous peoples didn't like industrialize in that way, if that's what you're referring to. I don't know if maybe you're also referring to organizing, but indigenous peoples did organize. Like one particular example was that the Iroquois were originally 5 indigenous nations, right, of New York, and then they added the Tuscaroras in 1706, right? So they were 6 now, and 6 nations that formed an indirect democracy, for which what I previously stated, the U.S. government formulated not all of it, but much of our constitution and our drafting of democracy based on their living democracy as well. So we did have indigenous nations who were quite organized governmentally, who had who had buildings, who had structures. And then we also had Native American peoples organized militaristically. We have alliances that were created, vast alliances were created in many different regards. For example, there was a lot of resistance when it came to like the Apache and the Kiowa Indians, who had actually been historic enemies, did cultivate a relationship to try to oust the American government, right? So there's those examples of militaristic alliances as well. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much. Kamel, you had a question?
Thank you.
You're on mute, brother. You're on mute, Kamel.
Okay, for Professor Tellez, I understand you said you were going to be teaching the history of Mexico. Would that be in the long semester?
Yeah, thank you for asking me. So I don't teach any longer, but we do have Marlene Medrano, who's here. So hi, Marlene. Thank you for attending. She's a wonderful professor, a new hire. So so my specialization is not on Mexico, although I love teaching it. And I at first it was hard for me, but over the years I grew to really love it and do well at it. But that's her specialization. One of her specializations is on Latin America. So she teaches it. So you could ask her schedule. But I do hope to be teaching Native American history. I did teach it for a year and a half while while one of our other professors was on sabbatical, but I hope to reteach that. And I can let you know if you just want to send me emails to Tellez@Mount.Sac. I'll kind of update you on my schedule as it changes.
Like this type of Native American?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Native North America. Although I do teach it in a hemispheric perspective. I do focus more on the United States, but I do also incorporate Latin America, Central America, the Caribbean. Yes.
Okay, I see. Right on. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome.
Do we have any other questions from students? I know we did get a chat. On the chat, they put, do you have any book recommendations? April, do you want to go ahead and talk about that book that you have right there?
Yeah, yes. There's so many, right? Okay, so I don't have them all right here. I should have done this in my library, but this one is excellent. It's by a little matter called Genocide. This one's on, looks at, the history of genocide against Indigenous peoples in the Americas and Indigenous peoples' history of the United States. My best friend, Kim, who's also here, another professor, colleague of mine and my office sister, she bought that for me, but Indigenous peoples' history of the United States is an excellent text as well. They called it Prairie Light, is an excellent book. And I could do a post for you as well after I'm done answering the questions. If you want to wait around, I could type them. So I know I'm speaking, kind of fast about it, but that is a text on one boarding school experience, right? There's another one, Smallpox Americana, which talks about the smallpox epidemic and incorporates and doesn't completely center the native perspective, native experience, but does have a lot of that on it in it as well. Another one is Long as the Grass Shall Grow, and that's by Clifford Trasfer. And there's an excellent book by Clifford Trasfer as well called Exterminate Them, A History of Genocide in the California Gold Rush. It's another excellent book. So I'll put a little list for you guys.
That's great. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments from the students or anybody on this meeting?
Do we have to put our name anywhere on the questionnaire?
On the questionnaire? No, on the survey, right?
Yeah.
No, you don't have to put your name anywhere.
Okay, right on, because I couldn't find a space. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So if there aren't any other questions, I want to go ahead, just going one more time. All right. So I know you all had a lot of questions in terms of books and things, you know, and other sources that you would like to hear, or you know, I know Professor Ataya has recommended a lot of books and things like that. So if you would like to get some of that, Professor Tellez, do you mind putting that together in an email and sending it to me, and I'll share it?
Sure.
Awesome, appreciate that. And so the only way you can get that information is if you sign up to be a part of El Centro. So make sure you email us at elcentro@mountsac.edu, your name, your email address, and your student ID number. And so we'll go ahead and send all of that out to you in an email, along with the link to this YouTube, to the YouTube link. And so I think we have another question. She asked, why are we not taught about Native American history in our K through 12 education?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think it's a complex answer, but ultimately it's also simplistic at the end of the day. And I think that I like to see the glass half full, but also I'm also a realist. By teaching the truths and exposing the truths about Indigenous history, about Chicanx history, Latinx history, about, you know, Asian American history, about all the history of people of color, African American, Black history, what is illuminated to the students is that this country, although it is great in many regards, it has a long and dark history and a dark, grim past. It does, and the country was literally, if not figuratively, as well as philosophically in many regards, it was framed off of the backs of people of color, and so it doesn't give a good representation of our democracy, right? It kind of calls into question, like, not only our motives, but our actions, right? As a government system. I mean, can you imagine, I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but can you imagine, you know, teaching somebody who's in 5th grade, okay, you know, or 4th grade, right? You know, in the California missions, right, women were raped. I mean, so they could say it in a different manner. They could say, well, Indigenous peoples were not treated as equals. They were, you know, subdued. They were not allowed to live with their families. Their marital relationships weren't allowed. And they won't even say that. And I think the reason why, especially when it comes to the United States involvement, is because the United States does anyone really want to reflect badly upon their own government system? But my argument is this: look, we have to recognize the wrongdoings of the past if we're going to be conscious in order to prevent them, let alone correct the effects of those wrongdoings and of those genocidal activities of the past.
Thank you so much. I would also like to add to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So I know you mentioned, you know, things like cultural genocide, and so we have to keep in mind that the K-12 system, the system of education, is an American institution, and so American institutions are created to uphold the values of the founding documents and the founding documents. So like the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, you know, they were created by rich white men, you know, cisgendered, you know, heterosexual men who, you know, created these documents in their interests, right? And so the institutions that basically were created after that, after the fact, so like the institution of education was created to uphold their interests. So to, you know, basically to strip us of our language and our culture. If you're Black, brown, Native, Asian, you know, if you're not white, you know, these systems, like the system of education, was meant to strip you. And you also have to keep in mind things like, you know, segregated schools and inferior schooling and education that Black and brown folks and Native folks received, right? This system was meant to basically, you know, whitewash us, assimilate us, and strip us of our history and our culture. So, you know, just simply put, that's why it's not taught in the K-12 education system.
Exactly. Well said, Fabian. And also it's so interesting, right? Because they want to assimilate us, but then they don't want to truly assimilate us with equal schools, equal education, equal access, because then we would be a powerhouse and then we could contest the system that exists, right? So it's like assimilate them enough to pacify them, to keep them quiet, but not enough to provide equal opportunity so that they can change the structure of the system to be more equitable and inclusive. Yeah.
And if I may, because we're all getting it, does that mean that it can't be taught? No, we believe, right? Many
Damn. It was coming with it. They got cut off.
it can be taught and it should be taught and it must study. That's the work that critical ethnic studies can definitely have in our communities. And there is indigenous people in California that are fighting to replace, right, the curriculum that exists, to rewrite it, to instead of building missions. I know many of us, if you grew up in California, you build a mission when you were a kid, right, to change that and to start learning about indigenous people. And also, it doesn't need to be, aside from it being taught in K through 12, you can learn it outside. And that's where real education happens, right? That's where all of you come into play, where you gain your knowledge, right, from the university and from school and from the community, and you teach it back to the community. So I really hope that all of you can get involved in ethnic studies, right? You have social justice studies that we have now at Mount SAC that you can major in ethnic studies, and that was work from mechistas, from the people that are in this video right now, like that put in that work. Profesora Tellez was definitely involved in that, and a lot of us, so please, like, we worked hard to have that. Learn your history and then teach it. And that's how we keep resisting and taking back the land and ourselves and our communities. So much love. Thank you very much, everyone, for letting us, be here and stuff, y'all.
Thank y'all so much. Maybe we have time for like one last question, comment. Would anybody like to say anything real quick?
I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time to put this together and to participate, because in times like this is really helpful to come together with our peers, as far as networking, and know what I'm saying, right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, I appreciate y'all. So real quick, before we end this off, I do want to leave you all, those of you that are Mount SAC students, if you're Mount SAC students, we do have some classes for you all to be able to take advantage of. And so we do have some classes that are offered at Mount SAC. We have more than this, but we do have like History 44, which is the history of Native Americans, that you can sign up. I didn't see it to be available in the winter, but it should be available in the spring. There's also Anthropology 30, which is the Native American. That's also, I saw it wasn't available in the winter, but more than likely it should be available in the spring. And I know Professor Tellez, when she teaches U.S. history, oftentimes she likes to include Native American history in her U.S. history courses. So make sure, if you haven't taken Professor Tellez, that's definitely a class that you want to take before you transfer out. And I do see somebody's hand raised. Vanessa, did you raise your hand? Oh yeah, go ahead.
And also, I just really wanted to appreciate April for teaching us and also me, because I didn't really know about Thanksgiving and what it really meant. Also somewhere when April was teaching all of us, but I listened about most of the things, and it actually really did help me. And I like to learn about different stuff where I can already know things when I go back to school. And I just really wanted to appreciate you, April.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Is that your niece?
Yeah, that's my niece. Yeah,
I love her. I see her all the time. Here, your uncle will tell you about this, but I'm sending you an air hug. Oh, thank you so much. You're so welcome. Anytime you have questions, you can reach out to me.
And then I did see something else on the chat. So my favorite, it is from Pedro Mariano Gonzalez. And so he said, my favorite thing about my Chicanx and Central American Studies major is that it equips me with knowledge that I can take back to my friends, family, and community, and directly relates to our experiences in a way that I have not quite seen with other fields of study. That's right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And
Thank
then-
you everyone for attending. I appreciate it. And thank you, Fabian, for putting this on. Annabelle, I appreciate it so much. Alejandro, for your beautiful contributions and empowering contributions. Appreciate all of you.
Awesome. All right, y'all. We're gonna go ahead and call it a night. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. I hope you all have some interesting conversations later this week. It'd be interesting to hear. Hit me up. Tell me how it goes. Tag me, at me. Take care, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye, likewise. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks taking.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.